Spirit of God, open our hearts and our minds to your word spoken to us, that in hearing you, the veil will be lifted and we will be free. Amen. So I think one of the basic pieces of information that we have all, at this point, as anyone older than maybe 10 or 11, realize is that life is fast. Life goes by very quickly. Days and weeks and months and years click off, and it seems the older we get, the faster they go. It's sort of one of those realities of life, that life speeds by in the blink of an eye. Even my 10-year-old Matthew knows how quickly time goes. He said to me many times how fast this week went, how fast this month went, how fast the summer went. How many of us have said or been told, I can't believe how quickly the summer went. September's already here. We all say it, we all hear it, because it's true. And in that speed and in that rush of life, we can get caught up in the pursuits of work and career and building our financial plans for the future. We get caught up in just the pursuits of life, and all of a sudden, 3, 4, 10 years click by. We wonder where it all went. And it's okay to do these things. It's okay to work hard. It's okay to plan and build for a future. We have to do these things. But what happens is sometimes we lose sight of what is most valuable. Many of us, my age and a little bit older, maybe a little bit younger, have all heard the song Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. Very powerful song about a man who forgot what was most important in his life until it was too late. And what Jesus is trying to tell us in the gospel is something like this. Make sure you know and focus on what is most important, because it's easy to lose track. Jesus is reminding us that we can all only serve one thing, have only one real master. And we better be sure we know, not we think, who that is. In the first reading, Amos is addressing a similar problem. The people have lost their way, they have lost sight. He tells them God will not tolerate it when you, in your financial success, forget the poor. Many who said and believed they served God now dealt dishonestly with the poor. We will make the ephah small and the shekel great, Amos says. So an ephah basically is a measure of wheat, basically the size of a bushel basket. And when you would go to the merchant, he would fill up this basket as a standard of what he would be selling you. But what they were doing is they were slowly, gradually shrinking the ephah, making it smaller, unnoticeable to those who were buying it. The shekel was a weight, a measure. They would put on one side of the scale, and when the people bought what they were buying, the silver, they would measure. So it would cost 1 shekel, 2 shekels, and they would measure it that way. But what the merchants were doing was making the shekel larger and larger. So you had to give more and more silver to balance the scales. Essentially, they were cheating the poor. And Amos is calling it on them. They were giving them less and charging more. In other words, the food that goes to feed the hungry was not the most important thing. The silver that came to the merchants was. Jesus is saying a similar thing. No one can serve two masters. You'll either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. It's something I think we forget. Jesus doesn't say we can't have money. Jesus says we can't serve money. So when people and we in our lives get caught up in these other things, these parts of life that in the end are really not that important, then God becomes an obligation. God becomes a requirement, something to be checked off, a habit, nostalgia. God becomes spiritual mac and cheese, comfort food, something that we go to when we need to feel better. When we do, is forgotten. And that's the problem that Amos is dealing with in the first reading. He's telling the people, you are placing all of these things before God. Be careful, Israel, who your master is, because you do have one. We all have one. We all have something that we serve at any given moment in our life. And it's not just about wealth and money. We can serve many different masters. If you serve money, you can't serve God. If you serve power and ego and your own will, you cannot serve God. If you serve your image, your brand, your agenda, you don't serve God. If you serve popularity, social ranking, self-preservation, you cannot serve God also. If you serve fear, you cannot serve God. You cannot serve two masters. And this is a big one. Serving fear. Fear has begun to grip the community of Oceanside with all that has happened this past week, and many of the surrounding communities. We all know and have had, I'm sure, many, many conversations about what happened last Monday. The murder of a 16-year-old in the strip mall. All of us are aware, all have spoken about it, all have thought about it a lot. No doubt it has been the topic of conversation at work, at home, in school. It's something that is on our minds. And having experienced it, we're afraid. Fear does funny things to people. There have been all sorts of speculation and supposed history on the backgrounds of both of these boys, both Kassim and Tyler. Why did Kassim move from Freeport to Oceanside? Speculation about Tyler's past, his upbringing, his privilege. Bottom line is these things are not important now. They're not worthy of conversation. The 16-year-old life has been ended. An 18-year-old has a road ahead of him that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Even the people, the young people who witness this are judged and condemned. But as we reflect on what happened this week and what continues to unfold as people of faith, we have to remember that these two young men are loved by God. Both had a purpose and a plan. And God had a dream for their lives from the first moment they existed. One dream is now over. One dream is seriously in doubt. But as people of faith, we believe that the Spirit can do what we say is impossible. And for those who were there, young people who were surrounded, lots of talk and chitter-chatter about them. But as disciples, we have to say, who are we to judge them? Who of us at 15 or 16 or 17 would have done anything differently? Who would have had the courage to jump in and do what we say should have been done? Who are we to judge them? And as facts come to light, it seems more and more that they actually did act and intervene and do what they could in those moments. Fear has begun to bubble up in our community. When we serve fear, we accuse and we demonize victims and perpetrators. Fear makes us exclude and condemn in order to make sense. Fear makes us see something like affordable housing, even the mere mention of affordable housing coming to our backyard, as a threat to our safety, an incursion on our privilege. The great unknown masses who may affect our quality of life is all based in fear. Our fear. This past summer, we brought our mission trip kids down to the Eastern Shore of Virginia and worked among people who lived in trailer parks, who were some of the kindest, nicest, most respectful, faithful people you would ever want to meet. But fear does funny things to us. Fear tells us that we're not good. Fear tells you that you don't measure up unless you produce, unless you prove your worth by doing it. What Jesus is telling us in the gospel today is put down fear. Don't serve fear. He is telling us to trust, to take that step into the unknown and allow God to be the lens through which we see the world. Now, being afraid doesn't make us bad. It certainly doesn't make us bad Christians. Fear is here for a reason. At best, it keeps us from doing dumb things. It makes us slow down and plan. But when we allow fear to be our master, when we allow fear to close in the walls around us, when it becomes the lens and the filter through which we see and experience everything, then fear is our master. Then we serve it. And we cannot serve God at the same time. When we look around us and we think of what has happened in this community and grieve it, we can and should be sad. We can even have a little more fear as we walk the streets, because there are some ugly things happening around us. Some things we had hoped we would never see in our community are here. Fear is pretty normal considering this week. But know that God is stronger than the evil choices people make. Because one person made an evil decision to disregard and disrespect human life does not mean that God is not here. It doesn't mean that God is not present, and it does not take away any of God's power. God has the power to heal. And when we live in fear, when we live in doubt, when we live in anger, say to God, take this from me. Take this fear. Take this anger. Take this uncertainty. And that's where faith and grace comes in. This is when we have to trust and believe that God is bigger than violence and anger. That God is bigger than self-doubt and guilt. God is bigger than our financial struggles. God is big enough to fill up those empty places in us that we run after others to fill. God is bigger than all of it. Fear is normal, especially in these days. But we can't serve it, because then God becomes secondary, and fear rules how we think and see and act. Take that step out in faith. And then take it again and again and again. Serve God and seek God. Trust that God is bigger than all that is happening around us. And every other thing that you need to be healed from will happen. Spirit of God, by your grace, may our hearts be good soil for the seed of your word. Amen.
Amen.